All right, we're outside today, and hope that the birds don't bother you too much, but we're in the back at least, so you don't have to hear too much traffic. When talking about a word and some definitions of things that you might not have thought you needed to have defined for you, but based on what's going on, we have some new words to discuss. Well, we're going to just talk about one today, but if you noticed going through the grocery stores, aside from the typical things that have been hoarded, and we all know those, and we're well aware of those two things that are being hoarded, I noticed some new ones this week. Soda is being hoarded. There's piles and piles of soda. Apparently people have stocked up on water, so now they're moving on to the other important things. And Doritos, or any type of chip thereof. I didn't think that those things were that important, but apparently with all the other things being bought up, we move on to other important things, and that brings to mind a word that you've heard, likely, depending on where you're at, but the word essential. What is essential? And we've learned what some of these words mean because various governors have defined them for us. For example, I learned this week that churches are not essential. The work that ministers and elders and various things like that, they're not essential. I know this because we're told that we have to stay home. Now we've fought tooth and nail to try to get around some of the things, and it was 50, and then it was down to 10, and then apparently God has said no. We're going to allow the governors to do this, so we're going to have to figure out a different way. Some of you have already gone that way, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But not essential. Now, it seems from reading the various exceptions, because I was trying to find a way that we could fall into one of these exceptions, but we are strictly outlined as non-essential. The governor told us that we are not essential, which is interesting because McDonald's is essential. They are allowed to stay open, and it is very important, along with Doritos and soda, that people be allowed to get their Big Macs. That is quite essential in our society, which I think tells us a lot about where we are as a society. However, not everything has got an exception. There's quite a few exceptions. There's like pages and pages of exceptions. Church is not in that exception. However, also not coming under those exceptions are hair salons and like pedicure, manicure salons. You have to stay at home. You're not essential. So what I've learned this week about churches is that we are approximately as important in society as, the ability to get your pedicure, the ability to worship at an assembly, and the ability to assemble for the sake of filing your toenails together, are approximately about the same. So it's good to have those definitions. We know where we stand going forward. Joking aside, what's alarming to me, and is alarming to many, and I know there will be some discussion on this and some different thoughts, and I'll clarify where I want to take this discussion in just a second. But what is alarming is maybe not so much whether we were forced to stay home or not, because that's happened before in society. I mean, you have to go back 102 years to the Spanish flu to find it, but it has happened before. And it's how quickly it got there. Without a discussion. There was no discussion, not among people who represent the American in politics, even who consider themselves, I hate to use the standard words, but conservative. People who claim to be religious put up no fight. There was no discussion about how quickly we were going to allow and mandate that churches are non-essential. There was no discussion. In times past, there was a significant discussion. Churches were kind of held in honor and kind of thought it has to be an absolute last resort to do something, but this was right off the bat. And there was no discussion about the importance of churches on society. That is what was alarming. You can say, well, they should have been or shouldn't have been. That's fine. I don't. You can probably tell where I stand just from my tone of voice. Obviously, there's room for discussion on things and for safety and whatnot. And again, I want to talk about that in a second. But the fact that it was done without a discussion, the fact that the possibility of trampling on the rights of people to worship was done without a thought, was done without a concern or a care by those who represent us, is something that we should look at and be aware of going forward. We'll come out of this and we'll probably be fine. But a baseline has been set now for what we do in any type of a scare. And what's going to happen going forward is churches are going to be shut down immediately. And you have to understand that. Whether you agree with it or not, the next thing that comes along that's maybe not quite as bad as this, churches are going to be shut down. So, unless there's an outcry of people. But based on, I guess, what I've seen from people, there's not been a major outcry. Again, we'll get to that. A lot of things we're going to have to get to. But Hebrews chapter 10, verse 24 and 25 talk about the importance of the assembly to us. And there's a lot of discussion about what not forsaking the assembly means. Acts chapter 2 talks about how they met. And we need to remember that both in Acts chapter 2 and in Hebrews 10, the discussions are concerning why it's important. A lot of it has to do with opposition from government sources, and that is going to have to be something that we consider as a people going forward. We can say, okay, this was a health cause or whatever, and we can put that in the exception clause for our own purposes. But is there a point coming at which we would say, I'm not going to comply with this? We as a church complied very quickly with this order. Some of you complied with it before it was an order. And when we talk about non-essential and the governors, we can complain about governors defining this as non-essential or whoever, local authorities or what have you. But I wonder if it's not their fault that we are considered non-essential. I wonder if it's because we've already defined ourselves as non-essential. Maybe they're just reacting to the importance of the church in our societies. What condition has caused the governor, our governor, your local authorities, from making these without even thinking? Maybe it's because we've given them no impulse to think about it. They haven't had to think about it. We're an afterthought, I think, in many cases in society. We have defined ourselves, I think, as non-essential. How many of you have lauded, and I know you're out there, the virtual aspect of church now? We are forced to do it via mandate, and again, there's coming a point at which we're going to have to say, I'm not going to comply with this. That will come eventually if we continue down this road, or we're just going to abandon it altogether. And I think there will be things that God allows and says, here's the situation. You're going to have to determine what you're going to do. Are you just going to fade away as non-essential? But how many of you have lauded the I call it hipster church, the gadget church, the video interface church, whatever you want to call it? How many of you have lauded that as a suitable replacement? How many of you have got excited about our ability to put a sermon online? And I do these little video things, but they never were intended as a replacement for anything. Our intention was to go to house churches. Those are in the scriptures. They met publicly in house to house in Acts 20. It says, and we know that even in Acts chapter 2, that they were meeting in homes, and they were meeting in the temple, they were meeting publicly. Nowhere was there any other replacement for some type of person-to-person assembly. Acts, or the passage that we mentioned in Hebrews, talks about the importance of that. That there is something that this interface church can't do, and that is it cannot replace the importance of fellowship, which is one of the 4 things that they met together specifically to do. It hinders your ability to commune together in celebration. I know we can do a facsimile of it, but those are facsimiles. They're not intended to be what God wanted. You will never convince me that that's what God wanted, was people sitting in front of a camera at their home in pajamas taking communion via interface. That is not what God wants. It hinders our ability to worship Him as an assembly. We are called the assembly. That's what the word means. Words mean things. And so we were intended to assemble. That is essential. It is essential. And those who give that up voluntarily, there's a problem, I think, in the heart. So that brings us to a final question as we get ready to close here. Something for you to think about individually. How have you contributed to this definition? What things have you done to contribute to this definition of being non-essential? What sporting event? What inconvenience? What vacation? What birthday? What family visit? What thing has arisen in your life that would conflict with the assembly and the celebration of Christ's death and resurrection? What thing has come up in your life that you have decided this is essential, and that means that this is not essential? Strange things like soda versus water, or Doritos versus flour and rice. Wow, that's a strange thing. Or hair salons versus churches. But what thing in your own personal life has come up and become a thing where we said, wow, I'd rather go see this baseball game or what have you than to celebrate the death, the burial, and the resurrection and the triumph over sin for all humankind who lived before, during, and after Christ's life. What possible thing could be more essential than that? So think about these things, and we'll see you again.